On track 2, we will continue with our theme of adaptive leadership. Our first session is a discussion titled Circle of Time for Well-Being, where our panelists aim to address the importance of mental health awareness among educators and leaders. Moderating this very interesting discussion, which I think is weighing on a lot of our minds and is an area of growing concern as we all deal with this new reality, is Dr. Arvinder Singh, psychologist and psychotherapist. She is founder and director of the Ashoka Center for Wellbeing at Ashoka University and Listening Circles Healing Spaces. Both these initiatives work on creating emotionally safe spaces for mental health concerns. Over the last 25 years, Dr. Singh's work has spanned geographies and focused largely on trauma-informed, community-based therapeutic interventions. Dr. Singh, I invite you to take this discussion forward. And for the audience, a reminder, please post any questions you may have in the Q&A box that is in the Zoom panel. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Over to you.
Thank you, Gitanjali, for the very kind introduction. Namaskar, good morning, and a very warm welcome to all of you this morning in Circle Time for Wellbeing. It is indeed a privilege and an honor to be a part of such an important conversation that engages with the ever-evolving role of education, educators, school leaders, and parents, especially so in these extraordinary times. It's established now that education can no longer be defined through the lens of 3 Rs, and it must now look at building not just academic rigor, but also emotional robustness of its students, prepare them to meet challenges, ask the right questions, be curious, and be creative problem solvers. To achieve all of this, it is important that we weave positive mental health and well-being into the very fabric of the education system and school system. Given the stresses we all cope with, there is an increasing need to create emotionally safe spaces for our students, to enable them to be aware of their emotions, build resilience, and to help them identify their own voices, build their own narratives. And I must say, all of this requires a huge amount of work. More importantly, collaborative efforts from all its stakeholders, the educators, staff, parents, school leaders, indeed, the whole village. Our discussion today explores what constitutes mental health and well-being. How does it impact learning? Why now? And how can we do so with our existing resources? Do we have a role in improving the well-being, even though we may not have the professional skill set or a degree in psychology? To answer all these and many more questions you may have, we have 3 very distinguished panelists today with their expertise in the field of psychology, psychiatry, and mentoring. Let me briefly introduce our panelists for the session. Dr. Amit Sen. Dr. Sen is a child and adolescent psychiatrist and has been in this field for more than 30 years. His main work has been in the area of service development, community outreach, awareness building, and advocacy. Dr. Sen is the co-founder and director of Children First, a multidisciplinary institute that provides clinical and community-based services, training and research in child and adolescent mental health. Welcome to the panel, Dr. Sen. Our next panelist, Nupur D. Paiva. Nupur is a chartered clinical psychologist, associate fellow with the British Psychological Society, child psychotherapist, and a mother of 2. She started Family Tree, a child and adolescent mental health team, in 2018. She's the author of Love and Rage, The Inner Worlds of Children. Along with her husband, Richard Paiva, she's the co-founder of The Art of Sport, a development program for girls using sport and group therapy. Thank you for joining us today, Nupur.
Thank you very much, Arvinder.
Our third panelist, Stefan Harmon, has joined us from Santa Barbara, USA. Stefan is a German-born author and social entrepreneur who founded his more than for-profit organization, GenDerations Mentoring, which works in the area of empowering communities to mentor youth, both boys and girls, into healthy, mature adulthood. He works with communities across US, Europe, and India. His methodology is focused on connecting students to themselves, to each other, and older people. This, I must say, has a special significance today when the youth and older people are getting more isolated. An interesting fact about Stefan is that he has been a professional tennis player and ranked in the top 100 worldwide. Thank you, Stefan, for joining, even though I know it's way past your bedtime. We will have our panelists now present for 8 minutes each, and after all the presentations are over, the panel will address your questions and queries. As Gitanjali has said, you may send your questions in the Q&A box. Let's now begin our session with Dr. Sen, who will talk to us about neurodevelopment during school years and its impact on learning. Over to you, Dr. Amit Sen.
Thank you very much, Arvinder, for inviting me and having me as a part of this wonderful gathering. Good morning to you all. Let me, to start with, share my PPT with you, and then we can start today's discussion. So my topic is to address mental health and education in the times of COVID-19. These are strange times indeed. I mean, I know that, I'm in the midst of a large gathering of hundreds of people, but I can't see more than two. Although I do feel electronically connected. So yeah, let's get on with what this really means, what the COVID, virus has done to our world. So COVID is indeed a phenomena like we have never seen before. And these are definitely unprecedented times. And there's this constant and palpable threat and fear that we experience pretty much all the time. Some real, of course, but some are imagined. It has indeed taken away the security and safety that we so take for granted. And also has posed instead these unsettling questions about life and death. If I were to liken it to anything, it'll be, the COVID-19 pandemic is like a massive natural disaster, like a huge earthquake or tsunami, but at a global scale, and it's still ongoing. And that's the most unnerving part of it. We just don't know when this is going to end. The way we have handled it, I think globally, has also caused a lot of panic and worry about it. The lockdowns, for instance, as we have experienced it in our country, has for instance, disrupted daily life. And by that, I mean the regular things that we do, which we usually don't think about: getting up in the morning, for children going to school, coming back, being in the safe environment of home, having lunch, doing homework, going out to play, coming back, meeting parents, all of those things. And similarly for adults to go to work or to whatever they do in the community. All that routine, that structure that it provides us, daily life, that has gone away. In the beginning, for the first few days when the lockdown came, many of the children, particularly the young ones, were thrilled. Absolutely, they were thrilled to be at home, not having to go to school, had their parents throughout the day. But it lasted, I can tell you, all of 2 weeks. And after that, people were pulling their hair out, both the kids and the parents that had enough of each other. The sleep cycle was going all awry. The eating patterns were going out of the window, and there was a breakdown of this anchor, that we otherwise take solace from, and the scaffolding and the emotional safety that we feel from the routine and the rhythms of daily life. And then, of course, there was this institutional breakdown of schools and colleges completely coming to a halt, offices closing, people beginning to lose their jobs, pay cuts, and that caused so much of anxiety and taking away of the role that gives us an identity in life. Yet again, there was a breakdown of anchor and identity. And then, of course, there was a loss of all the choices that we can make about deriving pleasure and joy and anything that is meaningful, whether it is a walk in the park in the morning and listening to the birds, or going for a cup of coffee with your good friend in the evening, or indeed going and catching a movie in a cinema, or a live show of of the favorite musician who's in town, or celebrating birthdays and other milestones in workplaces, amongst the family, and that also went away. So this disconnect from the sense of self, which we so again yet take for granted because it's out there. It's our connections is what makes who we are, and the sense of community that we get, the sense of togetherness and being in it all together. That also went away in a big way. So the meaning in life also got jeopardized and got challenged. And of course, we felt a range of emotions from frustration, helplessness, disbelief, and hopelessness. But the predominant ones were those of fear and anxiety of what is going to happen. And this indeed, this breakdown of all the infrastructure that kind of challenges what we take for granted, what gives us security, what gives us trust in our environment and people around us, the infrastructure and the institutions around us, that went away. And that is traumatic. And we have to now bear the aftermath of it. And indeed, in the beginning, it was all about the physical threat, but now the emotional aspects of it is beginning to unfold. So let's have a look at the mental health aspects of things in any case, So already prevailing, it was, what was prevailing in terms of mental health concerns has been alarming over the last 2 decades at least. For instance, WHO said that 20% of adolescents have diagnosable mental health conditions in 2015, and they predicted that by 2020 it's going to rise by another 50%, which means 30% of these adolescents would have diagnosable mental health conditions. And with this COVID, it's probably gone up through the roof, right? 25% of young people by the time they're 18 suffer from clinical depression. And when you go to colleges, it becomes even worse. In 2019, in a large-scale study across various countries, showed that 35% of first-year college students suffered from clinical depression. That is shocking indeed. Yeah, and India, of course, has many such dubious distinctions. And one of them is that it has the highest teenage and young adult suicide rates in the world. So over on top of that, now we have the impact of COVID, which is likely to unfold over months and years to come, right? And these mental health difficulties affect growth and development in profound ways, including education and intellectual development, physical health, social development, and most importantly, emotional development, which forms the core of mental health and learning in children. So let's have a look at it from a neurodevelopmental point of view. Now, these are, functional scans of the brains of kids who are from 5 years of age, as you can see on the screen on the left, to 20. And you can see the colorful parts of the brain, which depicts the extent of maturity. So although the size of the brain doesn't change through these years from 5 to 20 or even right through adulthood, but you see the red zones and the red, orange, and yellows are the immature parts of the brain. And as the child grows, you can see that the greens and blues and indigos take over, and those are the mature parts of the brain. And this is depicting of, or it is reflective of, the complex set of connections and very robust connections that are formed as a result of life experiences, of learning. And one of those life experiences or spaces for it is in schools, is through education. So education is a large part to play in the way the brain forms and the neurodevelopment takes place. And in fact, the key thing that happens in the brain, and this is a inside view of the brain, if you like, right? And here you can see the structures of the brain from, if you took a section right from the middle. And what you find is that there is a system of circuits sitting right in the middle, which is depicted in blue here, which is called the limbic system. And that houses all the feelings and emotions of every kind, our motivations, our drives, our impulses. And indeed, you can imagine how during adolescence, particularly, this part of the brain is throbbing, which is why young people are so intense in their feeling. They're impulsive, they're curious, they're driven to experiment with so many things in life. And what begins to balance that out is the prefrontal lobes, which is right in the front, below our, behind our forehead and just above the eyes. And it is also called the chief executive, or the orchestra of the brain. And this part of the brain is given to thinking, logical thinking, impulse control, reflections, and so on. And all through the years, through adolescent years, from 10, 11, 12, right up to 25 years of age, this process of balancing out happens. And indeed, if the balancing is good, if the emotions are well tempered, then the young person begins to feel more stable, more secure. And indeed, emotional safety becomes one of the key things in determining how the child learns, how the child relates to the outside world. So let's look at education. How does this emotional safety relate to education? And holistic education, I'm sure most of you would agree, is a buzzword since the last 2-3 decades. And most of the progressive schools are actually adopting something similar to that. It started in the 1980s. And just to put it out there, holistic education is not a fixed ideology, but an open-ended attempt to embrace the complexity and wholeness of human life. And indeed, it addresses all aspects of human development, including intellectual, emotional, physical, creative, and even spiritual. On the other hand, what is mental health? If you look at the WHO definition now, mental health is the mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. Now, this is important. It is not merely the absence of disease. Indeed, it embraces a state of well-being in which an individual realizes their own potential, is able to deal with the normal stresses of life, be productive, and contribute to the larger community. So, can you see the overlap between the two? How holistic education and mental health is so overlapping. And indeed, I don't think we can escape the impact of mental health on education anymore, especially with the times that we are living in. So then, given the kind of understanding, how do we equip our children best? Do we teach them calculus? Do we help them to improve in reading and writing, or do we teach them about cybercrime, or maybe anger management? Or what about preparing them for a nuclear disaster, perhaps a tsunami or the next pandemic? How about sexual abuse and crimes against women? And what about the materialistic culture, the warped politics, and the corruption that plagues our world today? Over and above all that we are going through in the physical world and the threat of this little microbe. Or should we prepare them to be adaptive, to be emotionally intelligent, to change with times, think on their feet, be creative? Should we prepare them to answer questions that we ask, or help them to develop the capability to ask relevant questions themselves and find their own answers? Indeed, the answer is for education and mental health to come together, and in prevention and building emotionally safe spaces. I hope I'm able to communicate through the neurodevelopment model, through the kind of impact it has had on mental health, through the current crisis, how important being emotionally safe is for children to be able to learn, to be able to grow as holistic, compassionate, empathetic, thinking, reflective human beings, and which is the need of the hour indeed, right? And circle time, in fact, becomes a very important part of the whole infrastructure that schools and educations have to build, I believe, right? And circle time is not just a weekly or a monthly thing. It is about life skills as daily practice. Now, how many of you would say that, teaching maths once in a month or once in a quarter will suffice for people to, even if you did a fantastic workshop on it? And that's indeed how mental health is looked at. Typically speaking, in schools, in educational institutions, you will have an expert coming in at the beginning of the term, or maybe sometimes if schools are really proactive, they'll come 2-3 times. Some of the schools do circle time maybe once in a week, but it's not a daily thing. If you can fathom the complexity of the skills that children need to learn, their understanding of their own selves and their world outside, and how they have to negotiate through that, circle time and life skills needs to be a daily practice. It has to be woven into the fabric of the education system. And that's where inclusive education comes in. And inclusive education is not just about having a counselor or a few special educators. It's about attitudinal changes, right from the security guard to the didis and caregivers in the junior schools, to teachers, to the management and the governing body. And to be able to build that awareness and sensitivity about emotional needs and the accommodations and support that children need at different stages. A children with a learning disability, a child whose family has got affected by the COVID virus, a child from a broken family, or protect children from bullying. All those things need to be addressed. And of course, we need to develop a system of early identification of symptoms and signs of all the mental health difficulties children go through, have a networking and referral system in place. And finally, and I think school has to play a very, very central role here, is to build a community of concern for our children. And this is, when disasters happen, when crises come, we look towards schools to build these spaces. For instance, when the Gujarat earthquake took place about 18 years ago, and some of the small towns and villages were ground to dust, the first thing that came up on tents were the schools. And the schools provided that nurturing environment for children and then families to come together again, and to be able to weave the fabric of society. And I think teachers, educators, schools, and policymakers have a huge role in doing that. So I'm going to stop here with this tapestry of ideas that I've thrown at you, and wait for questions if there are any towards the second half of this forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sen, for that very interesting presentation. Indeed, we need to move from the illness model to the well-being model. And building on how to develop this well-being, sense of well-being in our children, we have our next panelist, Nupur Paiva. Nupur.
Thank you, Arvinder. I'm just going to share my screen here. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay. I want to thank Dr. Sen for really making this so much simpler for me to dovetail into by talking about how mental health now is, and school is really where it happens. It's going to start needing to happen, and not in a once a month kind of way, but in a daily kind of way. So I'm going to be talking about building emotional resilience in children. So I want to talk very briefly about resilience or information. It comes from being able to respond in the face of high emotion. Like Dr. Sen said, do we want children to answer the questions that we have set for them, or do we want them to be able to come up with the questions they have? I have a quote here from Rudyard Kipling, and it says, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs, if you can trust yourself when all doubt you, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating. Kipling here is describing emotional resilience. When Abraham Lincoln writes to his son's teacher saying, teach him if you can to the wonders of books, but also give time to ponder the extreme mystery of birds in the sky, bees in the sun, and flowers on a green hill. Teach him to have faith in his own ideas, even if everyone tell him they are wrong. Try to give my son the strength not to follow the crowd when everyone else is doing it. To live this life will require faith, love, and courage. Abraham Lincoln is writing about emotional resilience. This is what provides inoculation against severe emotional distress, debilitating anxiety, deep depression, self-harm, and suicidal thoughts. The stuff that we loosely call mental health issues, and something many educators are familiar with. Because let's face it, you cannot teach someone concepts when they are struggling with issues of self-esteem or worse. And yet it is educators in schools, through what may be considered the most mundane of activities, who can help children build this resilience. Today, we do understand education to be beyond literacy and numeracy. We understand that today's educators have to help children learn to analyze, think, and question, even when we know that those questions will be directed at us. But for their mental well-being, we need to help children reflect and introspect on the one thing that they cannot learn from anyone else, which is about themselves. Who they are, who they want to be, what makes them tick, what makes them miserable, what turns them on. We have to educate children on self-awareness, because for everything else, there's Google. I'm going to take a simple concept of reading. Reading way beyond literacy and way beyond reading to gather information. Reading is the simplest route to introspection and self-awareness, therefore to building emotional resilience. Many of us as parents and educators are lured, almost seduced by the idea that we could get our children to express themselves in words. If they can tell us what's going on in them, then we can help them. But we also know that our questions are often met with standard responses. Like you ask a child what they did at school today, and 90% of the time the answer is nothing. Or you're met with silence. Or you're told, I don't know. So going beyond the fact that they might be defiant or bored or tired or simply disinterested in engaging with you, consider the possibility that many times children do not actually know how to explain themselves, especially when it comes to emotions. Teachers know that the way reading progresses, recognition comes before construction. So in the world of emotions as well, recognition comes first. Books and stories for pleasure, for nurturance, for a sense of satisfaction, for a good feed, not for grades, not for a book review, and not for even for a discussion. Reading, especially in COVID-19 times, attends to our losses, loneliness, friendlessness, endless time, and the uncertainty that we live with. Through characters in books, we can find our own unexpressed emotional worlds recognized and attended to. And after all, that is the first step to mental well-being, acknowledging our internal state. This is one of the simplest and most fundamental things that mental health practitioners the world over do. We listen. We help you to reflect on you. A book will never abandon you. It will always be there for you. And you don't even have to speak to it. The other concept is play. To learn that we rarely succeed at a thing as easily as or as promptly as we might wish is something that's best learned at an early age when habits are being formed. And then the lesson can be assimilated fairly painlessly. A child learns, if she can bear it, that she need not give up in despair if a block doesn't balance neatly on another block the first time, or the third time, or even the fifth. She learns to try and try again. But she will not learn this if her educators and her parents are only interested in success, if they praise her only for the end result. A child will only learn to tolerate frustration, to persevere and hang in there if she is praised for tenacity and effort. Physical play does all of this with very little classroom input. Plus, it releases pent-up aggression. It teaches teamwork, collaboration, not just competition, and it builds character, especially when we lose. Imaginary play, on the other hand, for which we don't even need to leave the house, is about enjoying your own company. And this is really something that's been put to good test in a COVID lockdown. To find pleasure in solitude is a useful skill, and it is also a sign of emotional maturity. It is a tyranny to always need the company of others. Can we permit children, our children, to have the room for imagination, to be irrational and illogical and daydreaming, without the need to be in response mode to the outside world or to our questions as teachers and parents? Because then we are really helping them to build resilience against boredom, helping them build self-esteem and capacity, all through play. You will all meet children who have lost family members, those who have lost all semblance of normalcy in their lives during this pandemic, and you will meet those who are struggling with lower family incomes, as well as domestic violence in the home. Many children will not have anyone attending to their emotional world. You as educators, you can help, even through a screen. Circle time is a very simple concept. It's an elegant concept, which is basically of children gathering in small, closed groups, which creates a safe space. They come together to talk and share through stories or experiences, not to listen to a lecture or to listen to ideas that the adult who is the facilitator brings in. It's led by a facilitator who keeps the agenda alive and minimizes disruption. And children are invited to talk about experiences where they know it will be met with a listening ear and with no judgment. And this can be done online as well with a little bit of practice. I'm putting up a short list of local websites which actually have stories available for free and in various local Indian languages, with pictures available for children to read even on smartphone screens. Story Weaver, Tulika Books, and even Audible, if reading is still difficult, you can have, and these are all available for free. For those of you who might want a deeper dive into children's emotional worlds, there is a book I wrote called Love and Rage, The Inner Worlds of Children. And it can help us go through what we can do when we work and we live with children. With that, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much. And just give me a second to stop the screen share.
Thank you very much, Nupur, for helping us see the power of stories in building resilience in children. We move to our next and final panelist, Stefan Herrmann, who will share his experiences on mentoring youth and working in groups. Over to you, Stefan.
Thank you so much, and greetings from Santa Barbara, California. This is a place I call home for the last 20 years, but I have been coming to India for about 2 decades, initially for my own spiritual development and just out of curiosity for the beautiful and so different culture than what I experienced growing up in Germany. But I do have a home literally, but also very much in my heart and in my soul in India. I live in a part of Pune called Deccan Gymkhana, and I have a small studio there for about the last 3 years and spend about 7 to 8 months out of the year working on my youth mentoring program called GenDerations Mentoring. And I was privileged to be welcomed in Pune by a good friend who organized what she called the Principals Roundtable. This is about 4 years back now. And Principals Roundtable sounded like the perfect opportunity for me to introduce my program to local principals and schools. And unfortunately, she said, really sorry, I can't answer your request positively for probably another year or so before you can give a presentation to our principals. And then about 2 days later, she calls me and she says, the speaker who is actually scheduled to give a presentation in 2 days just canceled on me. Would you be willing to step in? And of course, I took that opportunity. And ever since people often ask me, like, why did you choose Pune? And I always feel in that moment, Pune chose me to bring this program to India, which I have taken to many places around the planet, because the need for social emotional development is prevalent everywhere. I've taken the program to South Africa, to parts of Europe. The base program, which was targeting just boys initially, was called Boys to Men. And it has been received with open arms in India, even though the concepts are simple as Nupur just, I think you called it elegant and simple, Nupur. They are simple, they are very simple, but at the same time, the concepts of implementing are not that easy, because so much of the adult mind is conditioned around giving advice and coming from an attitude that tells students in very subtle ways, there's something broken about you. There's something not okay with you. That message comes through so often in our interactions. They need to be fixed. And in my experience, that is so much not true. Children don't need fixing. They don't need to be repaired. As a matter of fact, there's a famous quote by the American poet Frederick Douglass that says, "It is easier to raise a healthy child than to repair a broken man." So children, as they come onto the planet, they bring an incredible awareness and wisdom which often we as adults are not very effective in utilizing, because we tend to have a top-down approach and think that kids need our advice, when in fact they are very well equipped to find their own path. So probably you have heard this, that scientists are nowadays saying that by the year 2050, 70% of all the jobs that people will do are not even invented yet. You think about that just for a second. 30 years from now, a 10-year-old would be kind of at the peak time of his professional engagement. The jobs that these kids will be doing are not even invented. So what are we actually preparing them for? How is the change that they need in how we relate to them, how are we manifesting that away from knowledge and information? Again, Nupur said so eloquently, you know, they find all of that in Google. There is an answer for those things that require information and knowledge. So it's something different. It is resilience. It is ways of knowing oneself. It is ways of knowing other people and their emotions, and how to communicate with each other in ways that that really help us to create community at a level that we currently don't have. And the COVID-19 crisis has probably made that very clear, that, you know, family, as wonderful as it works in some instances, for many people, family can be a very difficult minefield, especially for the young people. There is too much of the old conditioning and too little of listening and engagement there that would help children to navigate in a positive way. And I hear it all the time from the peer mentors who were training in this program. As a matter of fact, the very first batch of peer mentors that we trained in Pune just recently contacted me and said, we would really like your support, your coaching in starting our own circles, because we need that so much, especially in these times. We need to be in communication with each other. And then they said, and we don't want you in the circle because we want to run them by ourselves. And I thought that was just so gratifying for me, that they feel confident that they can run their own circle. So that is actually what we do. So for the first 2 years, while living in Pune most of the time, I trained eighth graders to be peer mentors for sixth graders in group sessions. We heard that in the prior presentations already. Circle time, very, very important to provide a safe environment in which children have an opportunity to express themselves, versus, and that was mentioned as well, and I know this from practice, how difficult it is as a facilitator to not dominate a circle with my facilitation or topics that I find interesting, rather let them find their own topics and talk about those things that really matter to them. So 2 years after establishing this program in Pune, we had a scientific evaluation done by the University of Pune. Dr. Natu, a very senior researcher in the field of education, and she came up with a wonderful praise for our program, finalizing everything maybe in the words, this program is the need of the hour. So we felt very, very supported. Obviously, we do need some adults in these circles. as facilitators, as listeners, and reminding the peer mentors and also the sixth graders that we do want to stay away from anything that has to do with giving advice and applying so many of these old concepts of mentoring, but to rather find a contemporary, more modern approach to mentoring. And so the structure is very simple. We train some adult mentors. Oftentimes those are the counselors in the schools and some people who live in the community and who are able to spare a little time. Ideally, they are retirees that have time and are able to come to the schools and join us in the circles. And the consistency is a really important aspect of that. And then we train the peer mentors, and then the sixth graders are joining the circle. So there's typically about 3 to 4 adult mentors, 5 to 6 peer mentors, and then up to 20 total in the circle. We'll fill it with sixth graders. And I have a large reservoir of moving stories of what actually happens in these circles when these kids are starting to feel safe enough to really express themselves. There's such a need out there, and I believe that the educational system needs to address that, make those changes away from that strong focus on academics and going more into the social emotional development field. Now, I do want to also mention that we have, as of recent, we have worked with teachers as well who have expressed interest to be trained as mentors. And the scientific evaluations that were done in the US and in Switzerland on our program very much confirm that the mentors are benefiting tremendously from this program, because they also get to express themselves, they get to share their stories, even though we make a lot of room for the kids, but for them it's sometimes very important to hear our ways of dealing with life and to be real with each other. And that, in closing, is one of the feedbacks that I hear all the time when we ask the kids, why do you keep coming back to the circle? They say some version of, this is the only place in my life where I really feel safe and where I can be real and I don't feel judged. So I believe that we can provide that for children by training adult mentors, peer mentors, and offering the circles on a very much a grassroots level as a prevention program for some of those horrific numbers that we heard earlier around youth suicide. My TED talk is all about that, the prevention of suicide amongst Indian children. And let's work together and make the change that's required. Thank you very much. And back to you, Arvinder, I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Hermann, for that really, really interesting conversation. I couldn't agree more with you about the fact on children don't need fixing. I think we need fixing, as adults. And I think what we really need to look at as how each one of us, I really take that from here, how each one of us is absolutely capable of mentoring the young ones. And particularly important is the peer mentoring model that you share. I'm sure many people will approach you for training, for modeling, etc. So thank you very much for bringing that.
Thank you very much.
I'm now going to move to the questions that people have asked. There have been many, many questions. Many of them have been answered. I'll just pick some of those and see and pick your brains on that for all of us to understand. Somebody's asked us here, how do we as educators help our children to be resilient? Would you like to take this, Nupur?
Yeah, sure, Arvinder. Thing is that building resilience is, well, there's two things that come to mind immediately. One is that it takes time. I mean, building capacity takes time. Getting a plant to grow into a tree takes time. So there is no quick fix. Let's first be very clear about that. Anything that's worth doing and worth doing well is going to take time. So as Stefan said, consistency is key. You can't put in a drop or two in a sort of random way and think that that's going to have much impact. That's one. The other is that it has to be tested. One of the things that we know as mental health professionals is that the best way to regulate anxiety is to face up to it. And all the children's literature is giving that to us as hints all the time. All the children's literature is about small people doing big and brave things. Whether you go from Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter to some of our Panchtantra tales, which involve animals, they are small creatures doing brave things, which means they're facing up to what is frightening. It's only when we have that internal experience of I've done something that I was scared of, whether it is jumping from the third step or whether it is taking my class 4 exam. It's facing up to that builds self-belief and resilience, not avoiding it.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that, because it's just when you start becoming aware of the emotions. I remember having this conversation with you about learning to identify the emotions, because children don't even have that language. So yeah, thank you for pointing out that it's not an overnight job. Another interesting question is, in these times...
Could I add a little something to that?
Absolutely, please go ahead. Go ahead, Stefan.
Because we are in a circle, right? So we can see each other. It's wonderful.
Absolutely.
Just, I would love, if I may, challenge even the question, because that is kind of an expression for how we think as adults. How can I help the children to be more resilient? And maybe that's exactly where the change needs to happen. And I am not debating. It does take time, and we also need time in our circles to develop a vocabulary and all that. But those are kind of simple things if you make them simple. We talk so much about fear, for example. We take 4 base feelings that we introduce the kids, because everything else is basically above the base feelings as interpretations of different things. If I say I'm confused as a feeling, for example, I still don't know how you actually feel, because you could be angry confused, or you could be sad confused, or you could be fearful confused. So the language of breaking it down into simple structures and supporting the kids to use that vocabulary, not just even in the school, but also with their friends in their society, with their parents. Many of our peer mentors have confirmed that they're actually taking this back into their families, and where it makes a difference, where all of a sudden there's a family meeting and they're checking in first. They're talking about how they're feeling actually, and the parents are being introduced into those kind of concepts. And I think that's what we need to accomplish. We need to make sure that this is not just happening in schools, but it is reaching into the communities and influencing the way that we all relate to each other.
Thank you, Stefan, for adding to that. I move to the next question, which has been actually many people have asked this, that in these times, we've already counseled our children to maintain social distance, advocating the danger of touch and connections. What is your advice on how to prepare the children to once again embrace touch and connect after we have scared them of the same? Also, the trauma that's associated. Many children are traumatized that the school is no longer safe, as we adults have ingrained it in them. How do we encourage and change this perspective of a child? I leave it open to anyone who wants to take that.
Okay, perhaps I could say a word or two.
Absolutely.
On it. Yes, no doubt. As I was saying earlier, that this crisis and the lockdown and all the restrictions that have come with it has taken away some very crucial elements, which helps us and children to feel that they're a part of a larger togetherness, yeah, a larger community which is built on all these kind of things of meeting in social spaces, of touching, high fives, hugging each other, going for games together, and so on, right? And indeed, when schools reopen, it's going to be a big challenge for them to say that you cannot do that, because it's almost it's instinctive, it's spontaneous. I mean, kids will go and, when they see their best friend, they'll run and give them a hug, and to be able to keep them from doing that is going to be most challenging, because it is so much that what it means to them is so deep and meaningful for who they are as people. Because particularly adolescent children, when they're growing up, they are a part of this larger community, and a sense of self that develops is because of the connections they have with people and spaces around them, isn't it? Yeah. So we have to look for substitutes. We have to actually begin to creatively think about what is it that they will do together or say to each other, which will be perhaps not just as meaningful, but meaningful enough to feel together as a group again, right? So one can again, I mean, right now it's only the virtual world, it's only about the digital media, but when you come into the spaces, what can you do? Can you exchange things like little cards and messages that you give to each other, which are meaningful? Can you use the whiteboard or a board in a classroom to be able to, choose maybe 3-4 students each day, put up their names, and everybody puts up their feelings towards them, positive feelings, affirmations, etc. Maybe that will help them. Maybe they will be the circle time itself, when they're sitting together in a safe emotional space and talking about their feelings. That also is a deep connect that you feel, you can develop with people around you when you do that. So the physical contact is very important for kids, but as a substitute, I think we need to devise and create other uh, experiences for them, which will help them feel connected, and reassured that they're together again, that they still have that affection and love for each other, they're still there for each other, and they form a whole, in these very difficult times. It's so important for people to come together and feel that they are in this together, and that we have to create these spaces very creatively. And I think that the one of the good ways of doing it too is to ask children for it. And you might be surprised as to the number of creative ideas they will come with, much more than adults will, and they might be able to actually tell the teachers and inform them about what they want to do. And I'm surprised as to how even little children, even with difficulties, emotional or neurodevelopmental difficulties, are taking to the restrictions. They're wearing masks. They're making sure that they don't, they're standing in queues. They're maintaining spaces. You can see it happening in these small spaces that are opening right now. It's amazing how children adapt to if they feel safe and scaffolded and held during that time. So our job is to actually provide that environment, and children will find their answers, and they will actually come up with ideas which are creative and which will then again help them to form those bonds and maintain those.
Some of the questions are around digital circle time as well. Any ideas on that?
It certainly would feel, it feels very different to be in a virtual circle compared to a physical circle sitting together. However, there are ways, the word ritual comes to mind. There, routines, there are ways of informing the whole system, the nervous system, that, oh, we are in circle and we are connecting now. And that might start, instead of, the play that we typically do. I appreciate what you just said, Dr. Sen. It's like, it's in the beginning now for maybe the next, whatever it is, month or a few years, maybe even before we have a higher level of immunity. It might really not be possible to play those games where we can touch and all that. But, if we can start to incorporate certain ways of making clear that our whole system kind of recognizes, oh, this is the time now. This is where I can feel safe, because the kids really want that. They are hungry for this kind of work. We hear it all the time from the counselors in the schools, that the kids come to them and say, when is the next generation circles? When can we do the circle again? They're longing for that. They want that. There's an innate desire, there's almost like a human need for this kind of connection. And I believe that we will find along with them, I love what you just said, Dr. Sen, let's have them lead us in that. We don't need to do all the work for them. As a matter of fact, I think they're going to do it much better than I could do it. So I wonder, Nupur, you're doing this so much around sports with also with your husband, Richard, right? Nupur, you must have some really cool things you can teach us, right?
No, Stefan, at the moment, we're still at the very uncool stage of pushing ourselves to move from what all of us were nurtured by and fed by the fact that we were in physical proximity. There's a reason we had chosen contact sports to run the art of sport, because the experience of a team is what, and groups is what really feeds our adolescent so parts of us and builds connections. So we are actually still at that struggle phase, and trying to move this virtual is meh.
So sorry. So perhaps I can share some of my our experiences with our team. So we have a very vibrant team of young therapists. We are 40 plus in number. And in the beginning, when the shutdown happened, and the social spaces that are created within the organization Children First are again spaces where people feel emotionally safe, they support each other. And when the lockdown happened, there was a big, should I say, a huge sense of disappointment that we will not be able to go back. And very quickly, people were beginning to ask, when are we reopening? And when are we reopening? So we had to create again these digital spaces. And one of the things that we do, as I was talking about earlier, is that we do a lot of these celebrations and rituals about milestones, anniversaries, birthdays, and we often get the fun element into those gatherings. So we call it the playful quotient. So we encourage people to develop their playful quotient, even the adults and the therapists, right? And we've been trying to do that. Like, for instance, we had the Eid celebrations on screen, and the whole team came together, yeah? And there were rituals, there were fun and games and everything. And by the end of it, although it was not quite the same as the physical space, but we felt very satiated and at least, and could tell ourselves, my God, we can still feel connected. We can still feel together as a team, And I do think that if adults can do it, children can do it much better. So
I can
they'll probably find many other.
Totally see that in your sharing, in your face as you speak.
Yeah.
And I'll just take one very quick question because we're running out of time. I know we have many more, but there's a question about how do we help parents who are stressed due to work and unemployment issues? I'm afraid, can somebody just address this in the shortest possible way, the quickest, that absolutely reaches the heart?
Wow, I mean, those stresses obviously are being, passed on to the children as well. And the very shortest answer is to be open and honest and real about those things without overwhelming the children, to really pay attention to how much they can hold the attention or the attention towards a subject, but to be open and honest and not try to cover up things, because the kids feel it anyways. The kids read us so well. And when we always think like, oh, they're not quite ready for that and they can't handle that, let's create more trust amongst each other and be open and real without, being inappropriate, obviously.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for that answer, because it just reaffirms that being authentic in any relationship is what matters the most. Thank you, Dr. Sen, Nupur, and Stefan, for your deep and valuable insights. And thank you all for your questions. Your questions have added even more depth to our conversation. Your insights have been very, very valuable in looking at the psychological and emotional world of children. You've shared very simple, very creative, and very effective ways of helping children build the emotional vocabulary, resilience, and empathy. It's actually very empowering to know that each one of us in this audience, in our role as an educator, a parent, a leader, an uncle, a caregiver, can actually contribute to the well-being of our children and of ourselves just by, being good listeners, holding spaces for our children to express and contain their emotions in true circle time spirit. So I think circle time is more about the spirit than the actual physicality of it. I would like to thank Ashoka University for organizing this conference. My heartfelt gratitude to Ashoka founders and leadership for believing in the importance of well-being and placing well-being at the heart of education and campus life at Ashoka University. A big thank you to the audience for really engaging and being there. We are a whole lot of us, as I can see. Thank you, Gitanjali, for hosting the session. And this wouldn't be complete without a big shout out to the outreach and tech team at Ashoka. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you.